Hi, I'm Delmar Reinhardt. I'm 78, widowed, a father, a grandfather, and apparently, a man no one wanted to remember. On Father's Day, my son gave his in-laws a cruise and a Rolex. He gave me a barbecue apron from Dollar Tree, but it wasn't the gift that broke me. It was the speech, the family tribute, the plaque, all of it built on memories I made, but with my name erased. They used my words to honor someone else. They framed my silence as absence. And now, I wonder, if they've written me out of the story, what other truths did they bury with a smile? Father's Day crept up the way dust collects on a picture frame no one bothers to look at anymore. I woke up before the sun and sat in my recliner, staring at the group text still open on my phone. Dalton Family Brunch, June 18th, 11 a.m. That was it. No, Dad, can't wait to see you. No, hope you're feeling better. Not even a lazy thumbs up. I scanned it again to be sure. My name wasn't anywhere on it. Not even in the message list. It could have gone to the plumber and no one would have noticed. I still put on my cleanest button down. The one Evelyn used to press with lavender starch. She's been gone 3 years this month, and somehow her ironing outlived her. I hesitated at the door. The house was too quiet, too hollow for a day that once held meaning. I tucked the invite into my jacket pocket, not for sentimentality, but just in case they asked me why I showed up. The drive to Lyle's new neighborhood took 40 minutes. They call it Lakeside Hills, but there ain't no hills, and the lake's more of a pond they shaped into a crescent to look nice on Google Maps. When I reached the security gate, a young man in a collared shirt stepped out of the booth. He eyed me like I'd taken a wrong turn. "You a resident?" he asked, squinting. "No, I'm the grill guy," I replied without thinking. He nodded slowly and tapped something into a tablet. "Go on through." No smile, no happy Father's Day, just a lifted arm and silence. I parked near the cul-de-sac and walked in alone, invited but unclaimed. Aislinn was the first to greet me, if you could call it that. She smiled like a customer service rep and waved me toward the side yard. "Dad, we got you an apron. You don't mind helping with the grill, do you?" Before I could respond, she pressed a plastic bag into my hands. I opened it to reveal a fire truck red apron with Grill Master Supreme printed in bold, Comic Sans. It still smelled like discount bin vinyl. I glanced around. The tables were set with name cards and centerpieces, lavender and burlap, like a Pinterest board exploded. I didn't see one with my name. "Where do you want me?" I asked. She pointed toward the back, where the grill sat on a patch of gravel near the trash bins. "We figured you'd be more comfortable back there." "Sure," I said, and turned without waiting for more. The sun climbed higher. Guests filtered in, neighbors, colleagues, friends of Aislinn's parents. They all seemed to recognize Gordon right away. He stood in the center, shirt crisp, sunglasses tucked into his collar, accepting compliments like a politician on a parade route. Someone handed him a mimosa. Another snapped photos of him standing beneath a hanging banner that read, "Legacy starts with love." I flipped a burger, and the smoke stung my eyes. I doubted anyone noticed. Aislinn brushed past me an hour in. She was adjusting a row of picture frames next to Gordon's seat. "This is for the family legacy photo area," she whispered, as if sharing a state secret. She didn't look in my direction. I flipped another burger. Micah appeared like a gust of breath, soft and quick. "Grandpa," he whispered, tugging at my elbow. "I saved you a seat." He pointed toward the far edge of the patio, a lone stool tucked behind a tall palm plant used for decoration. It wasn't in the sun. It wasn't even facing the main table. "Thanks, kiddo," I said, patting his shoulder. He nodded and vanished before his parents saw him. I stayed at the grill. There was nothing wrong with the meat, but I kept flipping it anyway, just to have something to do, something to control. At one point, someone, I couldn't tell who, called out, "Hey, who's manning the grill?" A voice answered, "Oh, just Aislinn's dad." I didn't correct them. The smell of beef and charcoal clung to me like memory. I'd been a lot of things in this family. Chauffeur, bank, babysitter. Today, apparently, I was the caterer. It's strange how you can be in the middle of your own family and still feel like an unpaid staff member. The last patty hissed as I slid it onto the tray. My hands smelled of meat and charcoal, fingers slick with grease, apron damp against my chest. I turned toward the patio, where folding chairs and white linen tables waited for the next act in this family performance. Aislinn cleared her throat near the microphone. Her voice suddenly sweetened like over-iced tea. "Before we eat," she began, "we'd like to share a few tokens of appreciation for the fathers who guide us." All eyes turned to Gordon. Cameras were already raised, fingers ready. Aislinn handed him a rectangular box. Silver ribbon perfect. The old man peeled it back like he'd done this 100 times, and the room, hell, the yard, held its breath. A Rolex. Gold. Thick. Flashing in the sun. The crowd burst into applause. "Gordon has been more than a father to me," Aislinn said, her hand on his shoulder. "He taught us what true leadership and stability look like." Lyle stood by, grinning like a best man at a wedding. He added, "He deserves the best." More applause. Cameras flashed again. I took a step back from the grill, wiping my hands on the apron. She wasn't done. "And there's more," she announced, drawing another envelope from her clutch. "A cruise 2 weeks in the Bahamas." Gasps. Then cheers. Gordon pretended to be modest, but you could tell he was soaking it in. People clapped. Lyle clapped. Even the neighbor with the dog clapped. No one looked my way. Then Aislinn's voice shifted, casual, almost rushed. "Oh, and for Delmar." The words hung like a forgotten ornament on a tree no one decorated. She turned to me, a plastic bag dangling from her hand. I walked forward, slowly, the way someone moves in a dream they can't quite wake from. The bag was wrinkled, inside. The same apron I had on now, red, cheap, still carried that faint scent of discount aisle plastic. She smiled. "Just a little something." I pulled the apron out again, confused, then spotted the new tag, Dawn 25, promotional item. On the front, "World's Okayest Griller." Someone chuckled. It didn't last. Nobody clapped, not even Lyle. I stood there, holding it like it might turn into something else if I stared hard enough. Micah, sweet boy, snuck up beside me. "I thought you'd get more," he whispered, eyes wide, small hands tugging my shirt. I tried to smile, patted his head. "It's okay, buddy." Aislinn's voice sharpened. "Micah, go thank Grandpa Dalton again." He froze, then nodded and walked back across the yard. He turned once, looked at me, that look. It said things his words weren't allowed to. Shame, sadness, maybe confusion. I made my way back to the grill, the crowd already shifting focus. Inside, laughter rose, mingling with clinking glasses and party music. I sat down slowly on the edge of the cooler, the apron in my lap. The tag dangled. I peeled it off with deliberate care, fingers tracing the edge of the sticker, the price staring up at me like a verdict. I laughed, once, quietly, the kind of laugh that hides tears. I looked up. The patio was empty. People had moved inside without a word. No one said goodbye. No one asked me in. I stayed there, watching the smoke fade, wondering when my place in this family became disposable. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing that red apron. The print had faded from the day's heat. Grease had soaked into the seams. And the tag, 125, still hung there like a punchline no one asked for. I peeled it off and dropped it onto the kitchen table as I passed by, the sound of paper hitting wood louder than it should have been in the quiet. The house was dark, except for the hallway lamp Evelyn used to leave on just in case. I poured a single finger of whiskey into the thick glass we used to bring out when company came. The bottle made a soft clink as I set it down. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't touch the radio. I just sat there, staring at the old drawer tucked under the built-in desk in the den, the one I hadn't opened in over a decade. It was where I kept the things that didn't have a place anymore. I slid it open, slow, like cracking open an old wound. Inside, a folder lay right on top. Lyle, Business Startup. The label was handwritten, the ink faded but still legible. I reached in and pulled it free, dust drifting into the lamplight. Opening it, the first thing I saw was a photo. Lyle, no older than 17, standing beside that old Dodge Charger, his grin stretching wider than the hood. Best summer of my life, Dad, he'd said that day. I used to believe that. Behind the photo were yellowing receipts, loan contracts, and a copy of the title from when I sold the car. That Dodge had been mine since '69. It wasn't showroom perfect, but we'd built it up together, weekends in the driveway, tools scattered, Evelyn bringing out iced tea. I sold it during the 2009 recession to help Lyle launch his design company. I'd told myself I'd get another one someday. Never did. I flipped through the papers. Every number was there, clear as day. A sticky note caught my eye, pressed against the inside flap, my handwriting. A breakdown. Engine rebuild. $3,000. Cleared credit debt. $12,000. Vendor payments. $8. $500. First year rent subsidy. $22. $700. Total. $46. $200. I stared at that number, circled it twice, then wrote beneath it, slowly, without thinking, Father's Day gift, $1.25. The ink bled slightly. The pen stuttered halfway through, like it wasn't sure it should finish. I capped it and sat back. I couldn't remember the last time anyone thanked me for any of it. Not that I'd asked, not that I expected them to. But now, looking at that photo and that receipt total, I wondered, was the silence supposed to be my reward? I stood, walked to the hallway, and reached for the high shelf where we kept what didn't sell after Evelyn's garage sale in 2013. The box was labeled in her careful handwriting, Memories, Unsold. Inside, I found more photos, some faded beyond recognition, and at the bottom, another picture of me and Lyle. We were both covered in grease. The Charger's hood propped open, socket wrench in my hand, Lyle holding the carburetor like a trophy. We were laughing. That was real. I set it next to the folder on the table. It didn't deserve to be buried anymore. No tears came. I didn't want them. Just silence. And this time, it wasn't bitter. It was full. I looked out the window at the quiet street. The porch light flickered across empty driveways. Everyone home, everyone asleep, everyone somewhere they belonged. I pulled a fresh sheet of paper from the printer and uncapped the pen again. This time, I didn't write numbers. I titled it, Inventory of Silence. The first line read, Things given without receipt. The second, Things taken without memory. Some debts were never meant to be repaid, but I'm starting to wonder which ones were never meant to be remembered. The next morning, I sat in the kitchen staring at the same folder I hadn't had the nerve to put away. Sunlight slid across the table, but didn't warm anything. The photo of the Dodge still leaned against the manila file, and beside it, that figure I'd circled the night before, $46, $200. I reread it like scripture, like maybe if I stared long enough, I'd forget what it had cost me to make it real. I rose, poured black coffee into my old World's Best Dad mug, the one Lyle had given me on a Father's Day when he was still too young to understand what that title really meant. I held the cup close, like it could help steady the words already forming in my mind. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. 2 rings. Morning, Dad, he answered. Chipper. Not a trace of the previous day in his tone. I didn't waste time. That Rolex you gave Gordon, I said. Was it the one we used to talk about? That model we saw in the magazine when you were 17? There was a pause. I imagined him scratching the back of his neck like he did when caught off guard. Yeah. It was... Gordon mentioned he liked it. I nodded, though he couldn't see. Funny, I thought you'd remember where you first saw it. And then I ended the call. No anger in my voice. No bitterness. Just a fact returned to sender. Afterward, I walked to the garage. I hadn't stepped inside in months. The dust had settled deep into the workbench. The socket wrenches were still lined up, untouched since I organized them last winter. My eyes landed on the empty spot where the Dodge had once lived. Even now, muscle memory recalled where my hands used to go, which drawers held which parts. The air still smelled faintly of oil and sawdust. It was there, leaning against that old wall, that the memory hit me harder than expected. Our camping trip, the year after Evelyn passed. Lyle and I had gone fishing, just the two of us. We'd found an old magazine in the lodge with a full-page Rolex ad. He'd pointed to it and said, "Someday, I'll get you one of those." His teenage eyes had lit up with certainty. I remember laughing and saying, "I'd be happy if you just changed the oil on time." We laughed again, and he told me, "No, really, you'll see." Well, I saw, by mid-morning, I'd gone into town. The grocery store was half empty, mostly retirees like me grabbing orange juice and bread before the noon heat settled in. As I reached for a bag of apples, someone called out from the frozen aisle, "Hey, Delmar, my daughter said the brisket was restaurant quality." I turned. It was Bob from 3 houses down. I gave a modest nod. "Appreciate that." He chuckled. "Didn't know you were on staff for the Dalton events now." He winked, good-natured, but the words landed like lead. I smiled politely, nodded again, and walked off without another word. I didn't have the energy to explain that I wasn't the help. Not yesterday, not yet, back home. I sat on the edge of the recliner and looked at my phone. A draft message blinked on screen. "Thanks for the apron." I hovered over the send button, then erased every word. Instead, I opened the Notepad app and started a new entry, titled it, "Unsent Things." I typed slowly. "A father is not the man who pays the bill. He's the man they remember when they don't need anything." I sat back. The house felt heavier than it had the night before. But not because of grief. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something worse, invisible. The next time they saw me, I was no longer standing in the background. But days before that, I had to endure a few more reminders of where I apparently belonged. It started at the community center. I was returning a toolbox I'd borrowed months ago, one of those neighborly things that used to mean something. As I stepped through the door, Harvey Lunsford, a man I hadn't seen since the town parade in '99, smiled and raised a hand. "Mr. Dalton. That was a lovely Father's Day thing y'all had. I saw the photos online." I froze. Dalton, Gordon Dalton. I hadn't corrected people before, and I didn't start then. I just nodded, offered a thanks, and left. In the truck, I sat a moment longer than I meant to. That name wasn't mine. The praise wasn't mine. But the silence? That was... That night, while fixing a light bulb in the kitchen, I remembered the brunch brochure that had been passed around in small, glossy stacks. Aislenn's Little Touch, no doubt. Its title, Honoring the Fathers Who Built This Family. Below it, framed photos of Gordon in a navy blazer, Aislenn's grandfather in sepia tones, and some Bible verse about foundations and blessings. There was no photo of me, no line under my name, just blank space. And no one had noticed, least of all the people who should have. I'd been there, right by the grill. I even helped set the tables early, when Lyle texted last minute, and still, I wasn't on the page. I wasn't even in the room in their minds. That night bled into a memory I couldn't push away. I remembered Lyle stepping up to the mic during the brunch, his speech, smooth, practiced. "To the men who shaped me," he said. "To the pillars who guided me when I was young." He looked right at Gordon. "To you, sir. For the standards you held me to." I remember shifting behind the grill, wiping my hands on that apron. Someone near me muttered, "What about his dad?" But before I could register who, Aislinn jumped in. "He's around somewhere," she said lightly, then clinked her glass with someone else's. And that was that. Back home, I checked my voicemail. There was a single message from Lyle. "Thanks again. Mr. Dalton, Dad, sorry, long weekend." I played it twice. It stung the first time, burned the second, then I deleted it, but not before scribbling something in my notepad, the one I kept next to the fridge. The louder the applause, the more silence you carry alone. Later, I went into the garage. It's always been more than a workspace. It's where I taught Lyle how to change his first oil filter, where we tried and failed to build a treehouse kit, where I once stayed up till 2 a.m. sanding a chair for his third-grade science project. I opened the cabinet in the back, old wood, warped a bit from age. Inside were the trophies: Lyle's baseball days, junior varsity MVP, regional champions, 1998. Everyone polished. I'd kept them all. Next to them, I slipped in a folded note that simply read, Dalton, not Reinhardt. Then I shut the cabinet slowly, hand lingering on the latch. I realized I had become the ghost of a legacy no one wanted to name aloud. The knock came around noon. Just 2 short raps. When I opened the door, there was no one. Just a box sitting neatly on the doormat. The kind with smooth brown cardboard and a tidy FedEx label. I bent down to pick it up, and my eyes landed on the sender line, Gordon Dalton. The name hit harder than the weight of the box. I didn't open it right away. I carried it to the kitchen, sat it on the table next to my coffee mug, and stared at it like it might explain itself. I thought of letting it sit till tomorrow, maybe never opening it at all, but curiosity eventually overtook principle. Inside was a picture frame, big, heavy, mahogany edges, clean glass, a collage of photos from the brunch, wide smiles, clinking glasses, sun-dappled joy, and a card tucked into the corner. Thanks for making the grill sizzle, Del. That was it. I set the card down. My eyes scanned the photos. There was Gordon holding a glass of champagne, flanked by Aislinn and Lyle. A banner above them read, Dalton Legacy, 3 generations strong. Another photo showed Gordon and his wife with their grandkids. Underneath it, printed in neat calligraphy, Pillar Fathers. I found myself only once, in a corner shot, obscured by a plume of smoke, my hands flipping burgers. No name, no caption, no recognition. My throat tightened. The frame had weight, not just in ounces, but in meaning. It was a declaration, a statement I hadn't signed off on. I leaned back, closing my eyes, my ears filled with Gordon's voice from that day. He had stood tall, confident, a wine glass in hand. Everything Lyle has achieved, he said, is because of the foundation built by this side of the family. Applause, smiles, heads nodding like gospel had been preached. I remembered pausing with the tongs in my hand, sweat on my brow, and saying nothing. Now, the quote was printed in gold foil at the center of the collage. I stood and carried the frame out to the porch. The sky was overcast, the air warm but still. I set the frame on the table and looked at it a long while. Then I went back inside, grabbed a black marker from the drawer, returned, and wrote directly across the glass. Missing, one father, last seen at the grill. I didn't do it out of rage, not even spite. I did it for closure. For me. That evening, I took a walk down to the post office. The padded envelope I carried was already addressed. To Gordon Dalton. Inside, I'd placed a small flash drive. On it were photos from Lyle's childhood. His first birthday cake, chocolate frosting all over his cheeks. The day he broke his arm learning to ride his bike. Me kneeling beside him, bandaging his elbow. Our fishing trip. His high school graduation. Moments only a father could capture. I didn't include a note. No explanation. No sarcasm. Just pixels and truth. The clerk looked at the label and said, "You sure you don't want insurance on this one?" I smiled. There's nothing in there worth replacing. I left the post office without looking back. When I got home, the frame was still on the porch. I let it sit through the night, let the dew settle on the edges. In the morning, I'd take it down. But for now, I wanted it there, visible. Let him frame that. The email arrived just before breakfast. The subject line read, "Highly inappropriate." No salutation, no warmth, just Aislinn's words in bold. Clipped lines. What you sent Gordon was manipulative and divisive. This family doesn't respond to guilt. That was it. Nothing about the photos. Nothing about what they showed. No acknowledgement of their origin. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be twisted into another proof of my instability. I closed the laptop and stared at the window, the morning light streaking across the kitchen tile. Silence filled the room like fog, thick, but not empty. It had shape. It had weight. I let it stay. Later, A knock at the door broke it. Avery stood there, Micah's little sister, bouncing on her toes, holding hands with a neighbor's kid. "Hi, Grandpa Del," she chirped, already halfway into the living room. They headed to the back porch with juice boxes and chalk. As I poured lemonade, I heard her giggle. "Mom said not to tell you about Hawaii. Oops." The other kid laughed. Avery clamped a hand over her mouth, wide-eyed, then ran back outside. I stood there, pitcher still in hand. Hawaii. So that was the big secret. I grabbed 2 popsicles from the freezer and walked out to join them. I handed each kid one and said nothing. Let the day play out as if nothing was different. But inside, the word repeated like a bell. Hawaii. A trip I hadn't heard of, wasn't meant to hear of, but Avery had cracked the lid open. That night, I sent a text to Micah. "Thanks for being kind at the brunch. That meant more than you know." The dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, "I wish I knew more. Grandpa, I didn't know you helped Dad with his business or the house. No one ever said." I read that line 3 times. Each word hit sharper than the one before. It wasn't Micah's fault. It was the silence I'd allowed to settle for too long, thinking love didn't need record-keeping. My hands trembled, not from age, but from grief. Not a loud, dramatic grief, the kind that hardens in the corners of your ribs and makes breathing feel expensive. I pulled out an old photo album labeled Lyle, College Years. It smelled faintly of paper and time. Inside, tuition receipts, letters from the bursar's office, copies of checks I'd written, a sticky note that read "Work Study" underlined twice, with "Never Processed" scrawled beneath it. There were grocery lists I used to leave in his dorm fridge, post-its that said "Call your mom," evidence of presence, proof of sacrifice. I took a sheet of paper and made a list. College, paid. Wedding, paid. House, co-signed. At the bottom, in quiet ink, I wrote, "Not even remembered." The next morning, I pulled out the printer, something I hadn't used in years. It groaned to life. I opened folders, physical and digital, and began printing. Invoices, co-signed mortgage agreements, wire transfer records, my notes from when he asked for help launching his business, not for revenge, not to throw in anyone's face, but so that one day, when the truth finally mattered, it would already exist. At the top of the document, in bold, I typed, "Unsolicited investments in my son's future." It wasn't bitterness, it was accounting. And for once, I wanted the ledger to reflect not only what was lost, but what was given. They don't need to remember, but they won't be allowed to rewrite it either. The silence after that dinner was louder than any apology I never got. But it started, as these things often do, with a text. Aislin's message came in just after noon. "Family dinner, 6 p.m., casual, no emojis, no warm sign-off, just information, like a meeting invite from someone who'd rather not see your face but can't leave you off the list." I knew then it wasn't about reconciliation. It was staging, optics. I arrived early, out of habit more than hope. Their house glowed like a showroom, every surface polished, lighting perfect. Table long enough to host a wedding rehearsal. Gordon sat at the head like royalty, his chair slightly taller than the others. A photographer hovered, snapping candids that weren't candid at all. My seat? Near the kitchen. Again, just far enough that I could smell the roast but not hear the conversations clearly. Just close enough to fetch water but not close enough to be asked if I wanted any. No one brought up the package I'd sent, the photos, the silence, as if by ignoring it, they could erase it. When dinner started, Lyle rose with his wineglass. The room hushed, his voice, steady, confident, scripted. "I just want to thank the Dalton family," he said, "for always believing in me. For giving us the support we needed in those early business years." He raised his glass toward Gordon. A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests. My name wasn't mentioned. Then Aislinn stood, smiling for the camera. "And tonight, we want to honor the man who gave us our foundation." She presented Gordon with a framed plaque. The inscription, "A father is not who pays the bill. He's who gets remembered when no one needs anything." My chest tightened. That was my line, word for word, from a journal I kept, a line I'd written in grief, after Martha died, a private truth, now printed, gifted, given to someone else. I stood. My chair scraped against the floor like a scream. I didn't come here to argue, I said, voice even. But if you're going to use my words, have the decency to remember who wrote them. The room froze. I reached into my jacket and placed a small USB drive on the table. This, I said, contains every bank transfer, cosign, document, every investment I made in Lyle's future, in my name, not Dalton's. I didn't wait for them to speak. I walked out, my shoes echoing louder than anything anyone said. That night, my phone lit up, not with Lyle's name, not Aislyn's, but relatives, cousins, old friends. All of them had seen the dinner photo Aislyn posted. Gordon, centered, plaque in hand, smiling. Me, cropped out. Like I hadn't even been there. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I just backed up every file I had, printed everything again, stored the flash drives in 3 different places, not to destroy, to prepare. Next time they rewrite history, I'll be ready to publish the original. It had been 10 days since the dinner. 10 days of nothing. Not a phone call, not a text. Just reposted photos from the event, polished smiles, clinking glasses, and me either conveniently cropped out or, worse, standing in the shadows like I had just wandered in by mistake. The captions stung in their cheer. Dalton Dynasty. There were comments too. Such a legacy, one read. Not once did my name appear. I sat at my kitchen table, the glow of the screen the only light in the room, and scrolled in silence. I wasn't angry. Not in the explosive sense. I was something duller. Something that didn't even have the energy to break things. The kind of quiet that hums inside your chest, making your ribs ache. That morning, I decided to walk downtown. It was a crisp Tuesday. Clear sky. Slight breeze. The kind of weather that makes the world seem more bearable than it is. At the town square, I bumped into Curtis, an old friend from the school board days. Didn't realize you were still around, he chuckled. I thought your son was taking care of everything. He meant it kindly. I smiled, tight. No, Curtis, I've always paid my own way. He blinked, awkward, like he'd stepped into something deeper than small talk. We both nodded, then parted ways. Later that week, I stopped by Sam's Diner, ordered my usual black coffee. The booth behind me hosted 2 teens, probably high schoolers. One whispered, not quiet enough. Isn't that guy always at their stuff? He said, like a family friend or something? The waitress, wiping a table nearby, answered casually. Think he's the grill guy or something. You know, like staff. I didn't turn around. I just left a $5 bill on the counter, half my coffee untouched. That night, I sat down at my desk, the one tucked in the den, where bills and memories shared drawer space. I opened a blank document and titled it, To the Ones Who Forgot Who Helped Them Stand. The words came slowly at first, then rushed like a river once I broke the dam. I wrote about little things. Big ones, too. About tuition checks no one remembered. About co-signatures that never got a thank you. About a Dodge Charger I sold for a dream that didn't have room for me at the table. I didn't name names, just truths. I posted the letter anonymously on the local forum, a space where neighbors shared garage sales, missing pets, and occasionally, stories that hit too close. I went to bed unsure, but by morning, it had taken root. Comments trickled in, some confused, some defensive, some honest. One simply read, I think I know who this is, and if I'm right, thank you. That afternoon, a message came through my inbox from Mrs. Jennings, the widow who lived 3 houses down until her stroke last year. Was that your story? She wrote. If it is, thank you. My daughter does the same. You made me feel less alone. I didn't reply. Some words don't need echoes. They stand alone, steady as brick. I pulled out the envelope I'd labeled Legacy Unfiltered. Inside, receipts, letters, copies of checks, photos, every proof of every unseen investment. I added one more line to the outside, just beneath the title. Not for pity, for history. I wasn't looking to burn bridges. I was making sure no one pretended they were never crossed. If I was going to be erased, I'd carve my initials into the wood first. The envelope looked official, too official to be anything good. I hadn't expected anything from the IRS, not after all these quiet years. But there it was, resting squarely in my mailbox like a verdict. Inside, a letter outlined a routine audit triggered by a flagged transfer from over a decade ago. My name was there, faint and factual. The details aligned with the time I helped Lyle secure his first business loan, but where my signature should have sealed ownership, the report filed under Dalton Family Enterprise. Not Reinhardt, not even co-signed by me. It was as if I'd funded a stranger. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where I once showed Lyle how to calculate monthly interest on a napkin. He was 16. I was still dad then, not the invisible shareholder I'd become. The next morning, I walked to the post office to mail a birthday card for Micah. It was a simple one, with a cartoon dog on the front. Inside, I wrote, "To my grandson, Micah Reinhardt, proud of you, always." A check folded neatly behind the message. The card came back 2 days later. Return to sender, invalid recipient. I thought it was a mistake, until I noticed the scribble on the envelope. Dalton household only. That's what they had changed his mailing profile to. I stared at the envelope for minutes, not angry, just empty. I called Janice, my longtime attorney. Her office hadn't changed in 20 years, same walnut desk, same legal pads stacked in neat towers. She knew my story better than most. Still, her eyes widened when I laid out the file. Tuition payments, loan contracts, business registrations, vehicle titles. She flipped through page after page in silence. Then she looked at me, jaw clenched like a judge handing down a sentence. "If this were a custody case," she said, "you'd win full rights to your own legacy." I nodded. "But that's not what I want. I want to never need a case in the first place." She didn't say anything, she just nodded. And that silence told me everything. That night, I found myself writing in the old journal again, the one I hadn't opened since Mary passed. It smelled of cedar and dust. I wrote, "Misnaming is misplacement. And I am not misplaceable." I remembered the dinner when Aislin's mother had called me Mr. Frederick with perfect politeness. No correction, no embarrassment, just indifference. My name was Delmar, and I wasn't even worth the syllables. 2 days later, Janice and I filed a formal notice to redirect all residual profits from my contributions, business, real estate, interest, into a separate trust, one with no access by Lyle or Aislinn. The beneficiaries, Micah and Avery, no parental override, no co-signature permissions, just them. One day, they'd know who made sure they'd never need to beg for proof. "This isn't about punishment," I told Janice as we signed the last page. "This is about proof." She looked at me long and hard. "And about peace? I'll let history decide." The office printer clicked once more. I picked up the final document, folded it, and sealed it in a plain envelope. Across the front, I wrote in steady block letters, "Legacy, unfiltered." It was late afternoon, the kind where the shadows start to stretch long and quiet over the floor. I had just finished sweeping out the garage when the landline rang. The old digital screen blinked once. Micah. I froze. We hadn't spoken since the dinner. Not directly, not intentionally. My thumb hesitated on the receiver before I finally picked it up. "Grandpa?" His voice was cautious, unsure if he had the right to reach out. "I'm here," I said. He exhaled. "Do you still have that photo of us? Fishing? From the lake? When I was little?" I leaned back in the chair by the window, eyes drifting to the cabinet near the bookshelf. "Yeah," I said slowly. "Somewhere in that old album with the duct-taped spine." He cleared his throat. "I need it for a project, school thing. We're doing a piece on legacy, and I didn't want to ask Mom and Dad." His pause said more than his words. I didn't push. "I'll find it." That night, I pulled out the album. Dust bloomed into the air as I opened it, page after page of birthdays, scraped knees, plastic medals, backyard soccer. And then, there it was. Micah, maybe 6 years old, grinning ear to ear, holding up a toy fish on a plastic line. His hair stuck out under his little cap. Behind him, I stood holding the actual line, cast just moments earlier. But when I scanned the photo for emailing, I noticed something. I was only half there. The massive tree we stood under threw a thick, curved shadow that cut across the photo. It swallowed my torso, blurred my hand. All you could see clearly was Micah, like I was always meant to be the backdrop. He called again the next evening. "I got the photo," he said. "Thank you. I didn't know you were in it. They never show this one." I waited. "I don't know what happened between you and them," he said finally. "But I remember you fixing my bike. I remember the time you stayed all night when I was in the hospital. I remember who taught me to throw a ball that didn't land in the neighbor's bush." I didn't say anything for a moment. My throat didn't trust me to speak. He added, "Do you want to tell me the real story? For my project, I mean." I swallowed. "You sure you want all of it?" "Yes," he said. "All of it." That night, I wrote until my hand cramped. It wasn't a letter of blame. I didn't name names or detail the hierarchy of offenses. I just wrote what I'd lived. I told him about his father's first business venture, the night I sold the Dodge, the time I paid the wedding deposit without being invited to choose the venue. I told him about the apron, the shadow in the photo, the silence that had grown louder than any word ever spoken, and I ended it with this: love without memory is decoration. Love with memory is legacy. The next morning, I opened the hall closet for something else and saw it. The red BBQ apron, folded neatly, pushed to the back. It still smelled faintly of synthetic fabric and charcoal, but there was something tucked into the fold. A note. Micah's handwriting. "I'm sorry they don't see you like I do. I do." I sat down slowly on the bench by the window. I reread the line 3 times. Then I walked to the desk and placed the letter I'd written inside a manila folder. On the front, I wrote in block letters, "To Micah, one day." I didn't label it with vengeance. I didn't underline the pain. I just left it there, waiting, steady, true. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel erased. I felt remembered, not by the masses, not by the photoshopped memories, but by the one pair of eyes that mattered most to me now. I didn't need their apology anymore. I had his acknowledgement. The clip autoplayed without warning. I had been checking the weather when it popped up on my feed. Dalton Legacy Tribute, 3 Generations of Honor. My finger hovered over the pause button, but I didn't press it. Not this time. It was a montage. Smiling faces, backyard barbecues, vacations, Gordon giving a toast, Aislinn laughing under fairy lights, Lyle posing beside a new building with a ribbon in his hand. I wasn't in it, not even in the background, not a blur in the corner, not a hand resting on a shoulder, but this time, it didn't hurt. I actually smiled. I clicked download. They could write their version, but I would keep mine. A few days later, Micah's school hosted its spring recognition night. I sat in the last row of the auditorium, tucked beneath a flickering exit sign. My name wasn't on the guest list. No one waved when I entered. But Micah stood on stage, holding a folded paper and shaking hands. He cleared his throat. "This award is for leadership. For building a foundation others can follow." He glanced toward me, just once. Our eyes met. He continued, "My role model isn't in this room tonight, but he built every step I walk on. His hands, his silence, his grit. That's what I lead with." I didn't cry, but I felt something uncoil. The applause roared, but Lyle and Aislinn didn't clap. Their faces froze as if they'd been told a secret they couldn't unhear. That night, I met Janice at her office one last time. I signed the final papers. Micah and Avery's college trust was now active, irrevocable, no parental override, no access codes for Lyle. Janice slid the packet across the desk, already addressed for delivery. Tucked inside was a note I had written. From the grill guy. By noon the next day, the call came. Lyle's voice was jagged. "You embarrassed us, publicly, at that event. What gives you the right?" I didn't flinch. "I didn't embarrass you, Lyle. I stopped funding your fantasy." The line buzzed in silence. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed. "It changes everything," I said, because for once, I'm not waiting to be invited into my own family. That evening, Lyle showed up at my yard. No announcement, no apology, just fury. You're just bitter. You're ruining what we've built. I met him at the porch steps. The rain had started, light and even. You didn't build it, I said. You stood on what I handed you. He stared, drenched, fists tight. You're pathetic. I opened the door without replying. Behind me, the warm light of my home spilled onto the wet porch. I didn't ruin anything, I said. I just stopped carrying it for you. I left him standing there, water dripping from his jacket, looking smaller than he ever had. Later that night, I found the old tape recorder in the top drawer. I pressed play. Harold's voice, scratchy but clear. We built a life so others wouldn't have to struggle. I sat still, breathing in every syllable. Then I spoke into the quiet. We did love, but it's not our job to carry them forever. I reached for the new folder labeled Legacy Final, placed it gently into the fireproof box under my bed. This wasn't vengeance. It was documentation, truth sealed by action, not rage. And when I lay down that night, I finally slept without waking at 3 a.m. to silence or regret. They could delete photos, redefine surnames, crop me out. But I had already left something behind that didn't need their permission to exist. Sometimes the loudest way to be heard is to walk away and take the roof with you.